You make the case in your book that Stephen Harper is, to a certain extent, a product of Canada's conservative tradition. And some people might have a problem with that, you know, particularly those who've read your 1997 book,
Right.
Beyond Greed,
Right.
which is, I recommend. What has Stephen Harper done as Prime Minister to give you comfort that he's not a neocon?
Well,
Or an American influence neocon?
Well, I don't think the neocon thing ever really took any kind of shape in Canada. I don't think it ever had any legitimate roots. I'll point to specific actions. When he campaigned in the 04 election, before he won a significant increase in seats, but before he became Prime Minister, on open federalism, in French, fédéralisme d'ouverture, he was going away from the neocon view, which said no special deals, nobody understands. You know, he was saying, actually, you know, Quebec is part of our national identity. That partnership is a huge thing for our future, and if we have to make adjustments to accommodate that, we will. When the Bloc Québécois brought in this motion that Quebec constitutes an independent nation, etc., the Prime Minister didn't give it the back of its hand. He said, no, the people of Quebec are a people, we saw in nation in the French sense of the word, within United Canada. And by giving that recognition, he indicated that he really wasn't part of that kind of neocon, nobody deserves any special consideration. I think his apology on the residential schools, which was heartfelt and sincere and compassionate and genuine, indicated that he has matured and he has grown. I don't believe today everything I believed when I wrote a book 10 years ago. You do grow, you do mature, you do learn things.
Okay, well that may be so, but your book also, your new book, suggests that conservative tradition is also about civility.
Yes.
And in light of this, how do you feel when you see the conservative attack ads on Michael Ledge?
Attack ads have been used by political parties for a very long time. I was a candidate in '74.
I'm wondering how you feel when you see them.
I'm going to deal with it. But I'm not going to deal with it ahistorically by avoiding the facts of the past. I was a candidate in '74 when Pierre Trudeau made fun of Bob Stanfield by saying, "Zap, you're frozen," when we proposed a 90-day price and wage freeze to protect people from inflation. And then 6 months after the election, after he made fun of our Prime Minister, our leader of the party, he brought in price and wage controls. So there is a little bit of a history of that kind of thing. Would I have crafted those ads in that fashion? I wasn't asked, my opinion wasn't sought. Would I prefer a world where we could just have civil debate about ideas and issues? Yes, but I think negative advertising does have a role in our politics. And so I don't think it goes beyond the bounds of civility. Wouldn't be my first choice. But, you know, when you believe that you are basically working against a strong establishment that is always more comfortable with the Liberal Party, and the Liberals have the default position, sometimes you have to work very hard to build a competing base. And some of the things you have to do will be a touch less civil than might otherwise be expected.
Okay, Brian Mulroney was a conservative prime minister who paid a significant amount of attention to environmental issues.
Yes, indeed.
Stephen Harper is routinely condemned for his handling of climate change, and we win these dinosaur awards at these global climate change conferences, you know, by the bucketful. And in light of this, how can you say that Brian Mulroney and Stephen Harper come from the same conservative tradition?
Well, they come from the same conservative tradition, but they're dealing with issues at very different times, very different eras. It was legitimate for Prime Minister Mulroney to be able to say, we have an acid rain deal with the Americans, and to work towards that. It was legitimate for him to be able to say that we had to have a green plan that would save certain parts of the country from inappropriate exploitation. Today, for a Canadian Prime Minister of any affiliation to say we're going to have our own independent environmental policy without regard to the largest market into whom we sell, without regard to the competition between Americans and Canadians, I think would be profoundly naive. So I think to some extent, his environmental positions are no less, in a sense, embracing of the harder realities of life than those of President Obama. President Obama is profoundly popular in Canada as a small L liberal.
So you think our climate change policy should be shaped in view of harmonizing with our neighbors?
If the environment, carbon emissions, does not actually know much about borders. those flows move back and forth, and therefore we should have, in my view, a common agreement with the Americans and hopefully with the Mexicans so that we have environmental standards in all three countries which are relatively tough and relatively demanding and begin to reduce our emissions together. If we just do it here, the Americans don't, then we will see that our contribution, which isn't that serious to begin with, will be completely washed out by the economic reality down south. So working together, it may take a year or two more, really I think makes more rational sense.
In your book, that leads to the conclusion of your book, which was calling for a North American assembly. And what led you to call for this? And are you talking about an elected assembly, or is it just an assembly of people who are appointed by governments?
I look at Europe, where countries spent the last 300 years trying to kill each other, dropping bombs on each other's cities. They have found a way to work together on the environment, to work together on a monetary system, to work together on access through borders, to work together on labor mobility, so young Europeans can go all over the countries of Europe in search of work. Why can't we try to do something like that in North America? There are powerful counterweights to the United States. Brazil, Canada, Mexico has significant energy reserves. I think we should be opening up our mind to what a hemispheric community might look like. We all have poverty problems.
So is a North American assembly a start?
Yeah, I would start by sending existing elected people to meet on an annual basis and share best practices and begin to have some discussions. That's how the European Parliament began, in fact, and then it moved to an elected base, and now it holds the European Commission accountable for how it spends its money and what it does. We might not get to that for a long point, but I'd like to think that on the environment, look at how we cooperated on H1N1, where we knew that we had to engage fully with the Center for Disease Control, sharing with our own facilities here to get a handle on.
But there are some people who think the H1N1 was a big scam by the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, well, I don't think so. Actually. I think if you see what that kind of flu does, and specifically to vulnerable young people, I think governments on both sides of the border acted in a very appropriate prophylactic way. And I would much rather be saying, did they spend all the money wisely, than saying they underspent and, oh, we lost 15,000 people we didn't have to lose.
But getting back to this North American Assembly, you didn't address the issue of a common currency. Do you feel we should have a common currency with Mexico and the United States?
Over the long haul, I would like to see a common North American currency, just like the Europeans have a common currency. And my case for that is, we can't vary our interest rate decisions at the Bank of Canada very much from what happens in Washington anyway. There's not a large room for us to, and I think if we could work together on monetary policy over time, it would make some sense. But we're probably 20 or 25 years away from that even being a live prospect. Although the Americans, when they look at their own currency as we speak, and they look at the benefits of our currency as an energy currency, they may see more attractiveness in the proposition than they might have perhaps 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, what would you say to Canadians who might look at this and have concerns that we're tying our wagon to the declining American empire when the real action is happening in places like India and China?
So then the question is, if there's going to be 3 or 4 currencies left after the next 25 years, do we think a unique Canadian currency will be one of them? And if we're completely comfortable that it will be, then your point is very well taken. But if we think there's a small chance that a country with only 3% of the world's capital might not actually get to maintain its own currency for the next 25 years, that there'll be groupings around the yen and groupings around the yuan in Asia, there'll be groupings around the American dollar in North America, we already have the euro in Europe. We have to ask ourselves, what's our strategy? Are we going to sit back and let others make decisions, or are we going to try to shape the future ourselves? So that's the proposition.
Final question. If people see an influential Canadian conservative senator talking about common currency, what do you say to people who might look at this and wonder, is this what's in store for Canada if Stephen Harper forms a majority in the spring election?
And here's the good news. I am utterly without influence in the present administration. I am not limited in the freedom to put out ideas, but the notion that I have any impact on policy going forward is a massive overstatement of the role of what a private senator might be in our present circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie.
I've been speaking to Hugh Segal, Canadian senator and author of The Right Balance, Canada's Conservative Tradition.